It makes sense. Yeah.
Well, everybody, I hope, trust is full from all the goodies out in the courtyard, and so we'll begin our next presentation on the proposed 2019 budget. Let's see, this is a committee of the whole meeting, so we should call the roll.
Commissioner Schaefer is absent. Commissioner Allen?
Here.
Commissioner Klicka is absent. Commissioner Osterhaus?
Here.
Commissioner Ashcraft?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Here.
And Chairman Eilert.
Here. Commissioner Schaefer should be here shortly. He had a noon commitment, so. All right. First up, Mr. Neufeld.
Thank you. The agenda is before you, and as you can see, we're covering infrastructure and culture and rec. I think that likely we will be done before 5 o'clock, so I'm optimistic. And before we get into the wastewater presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Otto for a few overview points.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Mr. Otto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple points for major accomplishments and challenges as we see it going forward for this part of infrastructure, which again covers the three entities that you heard Scott just mention. Capital projects, being infrastructure, that makes sense, but it shouldn't be underscored and forgotten that the Tomahawk expansion now is well underway in terms of the approvals and the process to start making that effort go forward. $335 million effort, obviously the largest effort the county's put forward. But even with other entities within infrastructure that we're talking about today, for instance, in the next couple of years, Executive Airport will be looking at a new runway to the tune of about $6 million between design and planning and construction, about $3 million in the hangars to be replaced that are currently underway for the damage that took place last year at Executive, plus another $2.5 million to connect to Johnson County wastewater. So just in that airport in the next couple of years, you'll see an $11 million investment. Partnerships, that's terribly important when you're looking at the dollar amounts that are involved with infrastructure. The FAA, KDOT, the US DOT, huge partners, especially on the funding side. And a couple of those to mention out, the FAA continues its 90-10 grants for airport improvement projects. Transit, sometimes we see a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 kind of budgetary match from a standpoint of county funds to other sources of revenue. Looking at, since we've talked about money, how we plan out the spending of those dollars, both Transit and Air have done a lot of work lately on their CIPs. Transit's looked at it by trying to create a 14-year CIP forecast, which captures all of their capital assets in that duration of time and when they'd be replaced, and it includes taking a number of assets beyond their federal standard service life expectations. And the airport has continued to make a more robust CIP, which includes capital assets beyond the traditional items of taxiways and runways, but to include roads and building repair as well. And then refining transit service routes. This is, I guess, a preview for what will be coming, but there right now is underway a comprehensive service analysis that will be a complete review of all of the service routes today in the transit system. And based on actual ridership data, there'll be suggestions for modifications, additions, and possibly eliminations in that system. We'll talk about that topic a lot more at a summer study session once we get through budget here. And then economic development. That's a case where after about a 2-year effort, there's an underway by the FAA requiring an environmental assessment at New Century to unlock about 500 acres of developable land north and east of runway 1836. That will be in place hopefully by later this year, that we could start talking about a possible master developer to help open up these lands for development to generate revenue to support the airport's operations. And then lastly, it's a good way to end on, I think, a very continued positive note, which is performance and awards. That both Johnson County Wastewater and Air have been recognized for safety, and in JCW's case, they've been awarded many consecutive years of perfect operations at a number of their plants, and we hope that that trend will continue with the announcement of this year's awards later this year. So that's just a little overview of some of the different activities taking place within these three organizations within infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Nate Bloom from my office to make the wastewater introductions.
Nate Bloom, Budget Office. With me I have Susan Pekarik from Wastewater and also Dave Nauman from Burns & McDonnell. I will turn it over to Susan for the first couple slides.
Good afternoon. There we go. Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Susan Pekarik with Wastewater.
I apologize, I'm a little under the weather today, so I'll try not to have a coughing fit. But if you see me dart out, I've got plenty of people behind me that can step up here and take over. First of all, I really want to start by thanking my team who's here with me today, as we're here to present the wastewater 2019 budget proposal. So seated just behind me, I've got Beth Brandell. She is the Director of Business Operations. Julie Schornhauser. Julie's serving as the wastewater interim finance manager. And then Aaron Witt over here on my right. Aaron's the chief engineer. And then seated behind Aaron is Lisa Davis. She's the customer relations director. By the way, in case you didn't notice if you were out in the yard, Aaron is also a master at receiving pies in the face. So I appreciate him being a good sport today. So, and as Nate said, I've got Dave Nauman here from Burns McDonnell, and he'll be presenting the financial plan today. So as we begin, go back one slide, I'm sorry about that. I told you I was giving you a signal and I gave it too soon. As we begin, I would like to start with Wastewater's mission statement. This really represents the work that we do and our role in the community, protecting the environment, serving our customers, and enhancing our communities. Next slide. And so as we move through the key points here, this is really to highlight some key points from last year, as well as looking forward into the next year and into the future. So first, in keeping with the board's strategic priority, as Aaron mentioned, the Tomahawk expansion is underway. And again, I would like to thank the board for their support on this project, which will really provide us the ability to control our costs long term, as well as the best environmental solution. Also, we'll be restructuring debt with a larger sale in 2018 than originally planned for the Tomahawk project. And this is really based on feedback from the Commission. Wastewater staff, budget staff engaged Springstead, and we evaluated selling bonds sooner with the federal government's statement or stated intent to raise rates. And so based on that restructuring and an estimate on future interest rates, we estimate we should save around $14 million. And Nate and David will both talk a little bit more about this restructuring here in a few minutes. Now, during the Tomahawk construction project, we'll be shutting the treatment plant down and sending all of the flow to Kansas City, Missouri to treat for us until the new facility is put online, which is in 2021. This will result in additional flow volume being sent to Kansas City, Missouri during that time. The rates we received from Kansas City, Missouri this year were higher than what we had included in our financial model that we presented last year. The Kansas City, Missouri's rate is based on a cost of service, and that's something that they actually perform annually. We met with the city to discuss their cost of service this year, and we offered some recommendations, and so they agreed to actually consider those recommendations going forward and as they're developing that cost of service into next year. Dave will talk a little bit more in detail about the impact of that rate on the proposed budget here in a few minutes. Next, we have development and plan review activity. So you may recall from our capital improvement program presentation that we made earlier this spring, I think on March 30th, or April 5th rather, we continue to see sustained development activity. As we presented in the capital program COW, we've seen permit sales that have been sustained above 1,300 permits per year or more since 2013. And in just the first 4 months this year, we've already seen an increase in the number of sewer main projects that are being submitted to us for review. Our continuous improvement efforts to work toward improving the services this community include more outreach. We've actually done several presentations to different members of the development community. These have actually provided a great opportunity for us to learn from each other. So I think they've been very good. But even with that, we have experienced some backlog, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the performance measures. I do have some good news to share. Permit compliance. So last week, last week I received an email from National Association of Clean Water Agencies. That's the organization that John was a board member and we belong to. We actually were notified that we will receive 4 platinum awards again this year. In order to receive a platinum award, you have to have gone 5 or more years without a permit violation. And so we have one facility that's gone 13 years. one that's gone 12, and 2 that have gone 6 years without permit violation. So we're very proud of that, and we'll be back in the fall after that's presented to us in the summer to actually present that here in the board meeting. And then lastly, a little bit about integrated planning. As we look forward, we've discussed the need to renew the Nelson Complex. It's our oldest facility and dates back to 1945. As part of evaluating Nelson and its service area, we do need to look at integrated planning to help us prioritize our water quality obligations and considering all of our system needs, including reinvesting in our system. We are in the early stages of the study, and we have had some preliminary talks with the regulators that have been very positive, and this includes talks with EPA headquarters. And so with this, I will turn it back over to Nate.
Okay.
I have a few budget slides to go through. The total operations budget for wastewater for 2019 is $68.6 million. That is excluding cost allocation and risk management. You'll notice that is an increase over 2018, and that is due to the RARs that we'll get into here in a second. The capital budget, you'll notice there's a significant decrease compared to 2018. That is due to restructuring of Tomahawk. We're going to issue more debt in 2018. You'll notice that the original budget was $117 million for 2018. We're going to probably come back to the board here in a few weeks to discuss a budget amendment for 2018. We're looking at an estimate of $294 million now. The total FTEs increased to 219.23 for 2019. The funded RARs include 5 positions, 2 of which are for the Tomahawk plant. That would be the plant superintendent and operations engineer. You'll notice the plant superintendent will be starting later in the year next year, so it's only 0.23 FTEs for 2019. And then Susan touched briefly on the KCMO increased cost. That's due to rates, and also they're taking on increased flow. We have $200,000 for chemicals for treatment. And then funded CIP, it's a mixture of several different projects, but that's about $39 million for 2019.
The $6.7 million for the interlocal agreement with KCMO, that's not for a full year, I'm assuming, but when the plant is fully decommissioned, when will that be?
We'll actually be diverting flow this summer. And so that RAR is for 2019, so we'll be diverting flow the entire year next year.
So we should expect, what, $12 or $13 million increase for a full year on that flow charge?
That is the full year. Is that a
Pardon?
fair statement?
The 6 point,
Here we go.
thank you. The 6.7 is the full impact in 2019. You will see a larger impact in 2020.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Allen.
I have maybe a question on a cost analysis on issuing those bonds early, and on the surface, it appears like it's something I would probably be strongly in favor of. But I'm just trying to understand the process and make sure cost analysis is, if we issue those bonds early, are we going to immediately start paying those the following year, or?
The way that Springstead has structured that debt is interest-only payments for the next 3 or 4 years, and then principal is deferred. So your full principal and interest payments don't start being incurred until about the time that the plan is operational.
Okay. I just want to make sure I have a clear cost analysis, because of the large dollar amount and holding that money and then paying it out over maybe a 3-year period of time, or possibly 4-year. And I understand you can lock in, and if the market goes up substantially, it was a real good move. I'm just want to make sure that I have a clear understanding of the pros and cons. But on the surface, it makes sense to maybe take a strong look at that. But there are possibly some disadvantages of doing that early and paying interest on that if you didn't do it, the other way around. So you're not going to need any construction loan money by doing that then, or? I mean, normally a project that big, to pay it as it goes along, you'd be issuing bonds. Maybe explain that process.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if you want to speak to that now, either Nate or Dave, or otherwise.
I can follow
it'll
up
be
on
part.
it.
Yeah, we can talk to that when we get more into the debt service discussion,
But
perhaps.
on the surface, it sounds good.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure that I understand the pros and the cons of that. So, because it appears we are incurring some additional costs by doing that early.
That is correct. We are taking the chance that interest rates are going up, and if they go down, we would see a negative impact.
Thank you.
Generally, we would issue debt on a cash flow basis. For the trends and measures, there's several on the next couple slides. I'll just point out that we are meeting our goals on each key point, and all of these measures do relate back or are impacted by the 5 positions that we're requesting in the RARs. I will just say that odor complaints have, gone down significantly for 2017. I believe Susan would like to comment on the plan reviews within a allotted time measure.
Yeah, I thought I would just give a little update on that's the graph on the right-hand side of the slide currently. The plan reviews within our levels of service. So you may recall our level of service is that 80% of the time we'll review first submittals for private sewer main projects and commercial projects within 14 days and then resubmittals within 7 days. The 2017 number has us above our level of service, but it's got a couple of asterisks there. It's not a full year of data. Last year, you might recall, we actually switched to our online permitting system, and so we're still working through the kinks of getting the reporting piece out there. So generally, we ended up 2017 about 76%, so just below, again, our goal for 80%. But we have been trying a couple of different things, and so some of those things have resulted in positive results, and some have not worked out quite so well. But one of the goals is really, we know the development community wants to move through our process as quickly as possible. So we're working with them more on the first submittals, which is taking a little longer, sacrificing our level of service a little bit there in order to then get them through our process in fewer submittals, more like 2 submittals, so the second submittal they can get out the door and get permitted. So as we continue to work with the community, we'll refine that. We just kicked off looking at our strategic business plan and updating that this year, and I think part of that will include discussions with the community about what changes we might make to how we would measure our level of service. Does this still meet the needs of what they need, or should we be looking at a different measure? And if you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to answer them.
Mr. Ashcraft.
A few questions about this, but I wanted to go back about the KCMO treatment for, I just want to make sure, they do have the capacity to be able to treat our waste, right? I mean, that's not going to be an issue. They're not going to say 9 months in, well, wait, we can't take it all, we've got to do something. I mean, that's all been worked out, right?
Correct. We've talked through what they can take. I mean, there may be wet weather events that they can't take everything for, but that's what we're prepared for at the site.
I just wanted to make sure that would, because once you close or shut down the plant, I mean, we're committed.
We're
right?
committed.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, very good. And Ms. McCarrick, thank you for your comments. You and I have had some conversations on this because I was looking at these measures and the plans reviewed within a lot of time. You've got going forward 80%, but the question was, what does the customer expect? And it sounds like you're trying to address that, and I commend you trying to segment it and work on those issues. I mean, that's a meaningful approach. On some of these, though, do you have goals that you're shooting for? For example, you say miles of lines cleaned or miles of lines televised. Are those good number?
Are you looking in the budget book when you reference those?
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
Absolutely. We set goals.
What is the goal? I mean, you have some system strategy, and I'm going to pick a number. We have 10,000 miles, so to do it within a reasonable engineering time frame, you have to do so many a year. So are we meeting that strategy, or are we falling behind? Give me some sense there.
Sure. So, for example, well, the goals for the measures that you see on the slides are stated there. On the measures that we did not provide slides for example, miles of lines cleaned, we do establish a goal each year. And so that changes. A lot of that comes out of our asset management program as we're assessing how many miles we can clean per year. You may recall that we've spoken to the fact that our goal is to clean clay pipe between every 1 and 2 years, and then on the other end of the spectrum would be plastic pipe every 8 years, 7 to 8 years. And so each year we're establishing a goal based on what needs to be cleaned that year, what's basically come up to be cleaned that year, what's our goal to clean. So that gets updated each year.
Yeah. So we look at these measures, and so is 525 good, or could it be better, or is it just adequate? I mean, how do we assess the performance?
I'm going to have Aaron help me with that. I know he can speak a little bit more about how that goal is established. And
please understand, I'm not trying to challenge a particular goal, but I'm just trying to understand the general way that I should be interpreting these. And my question really leads to the balanced scorecard work that you did and how this fits into that, and overall, how are we doing? These measures they may be great, but how are we doing in terms of our balanced scorecard?
Okay.
So,
you want to go ahead?
We're doing well with that, and through our asset management program. Aaron Witt, wastewater. We're doing well as far as meeting our goals, and we're tying those levels of service. That brings in the cost it takes to perform that service. So we're evaluating the different types of pipe we have, what those conditions are, when we need to clean those pipes, when we need to TV those pipes. And so that's just part of our asset management program. There's an action for each and every pipe in our system. And so as those come due, then we're able to look at that. An example is when a few years back we were meeting that cleaning goal, but we had some challenges on our inspection side. So instead of purchasing a cleaning truck that was coming due, we were able to purchase a TV truck instead and use the same staff and train them up, and they were able to meet our needs on the television inspection side without increasing staff or equipment.
well, and I trust that you are doing well, but how do I tell that from this? I mean, what is this supposed to be telling me? They're just numbers in terms of what your goal or your expectations are, and I trust what you say, but how do I read this to get to that conclusion?
And there's probably more information that could be tied into that. I'd be glad to speak with you about that. There are options like how many backups we're having, because the cleaning directly affects maybe how many dry weather backups we have.
And you've got backups listed, but that's just kind of the question of what I'm supposed to do with it. So, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just point out on the last slide that customer satisfaction remains high and above our goal of 85%. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave Nauman for the financial plan.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Dave Nauman, Burns & McDonnell. It's my pleasure to be with you again this year to talk about financial planning and rates for Johnson County wastewater. Last year, our anticipated increase for 2019 was 7.75%. Despite a number of changes and adjustments in the financial plan, some to the good, some to the bad, that 7.75% still works. It's adequate. It meets the financial needs of the system according to the plan that we've been following here for several years now. The Tomahawk strategy, as has been mentioned, for debt issuance has been adjusted to reflect two issues. That really is I would consider it a hedge against interest rate risk. So you do carry some short-term higher interest expense. You'll be able to see that on one of our slides. But the long-term benefit hopefully is favorable for your interest rates. After Tomahawk is completed, and you'll see this in some of our slides too, we expect the rate increase pressure on JCW to subside somewhat. We're going to talk a moment about what we see happening in the industry. We've talked in the past about the average increase for Johnson County wastewater being approximately 6% a year. So we'll review where we're at against those measures. But I do expect long-term that the pressure on rates will come down a little bit compared to where we're at right now. After implementation of the 2019 rates, we also anticipate your rates and the typical bill for a median household user in your service area to be very comparable to and a little favorable to regional peers. So I mentioned some industry trends. There's a number of different measures that we can look at in the industry. One is provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as a component of the Consumer Price Index. The National Association of Clean Water Agencies provides some tracking of the cost of wastewater, and as does American Water Works in a really robust rate survey they do. All of those data points tell us for an extended period of time that average rate increases are about 5 to 6%. And we can look at some other surveys as well, and they all cluster around that 6% threshold. It just so happens that Johnson County Wastewater's average increase has been about that amount, but every community is different, and there are exceptions to every community. Right now, and we'll see this here in a few slides, you're at a slightly higher than average position, but we know there's a very large project underway. So every community is different, there are exceptions, but I think this gives you some context around what's happening industry-wide. I would also say, too, the renewal and replacement is a tremendous pressure on rates for sewer utilities, water utilities as well. And we know, based on a lot of industry reporting, that the investment in underground infrastructure is really not where it ought to be industry-wide. And so when we look at these benchmarks of 5 to 6% a year, I would suggest they're probably not enough to be addressing the long-term needs of utilities in general.
Mr. Newman, how do we respond when people say, well, inflation isn't that high, or wage growth isn't that high for me or my family, or I'm on a fixed income? How do we position ourselves to respond in a meaningful way other than saying infrastructure is expensive, and I know it's expensive, but I mean, why the difference? And maybe a couple percent doesn't mean that much to you or me, but to a lot of people,
it's meaningful.
When the bill keeps going up, we keep getting calls.
I understand, and that's an issue industry-wide, really. Consumer price index or cost of living, it's probably 2% a year over a long period of time. And so when we see rate increases or pressure on sewer rates at 5 to 6%, there's obviously a large gap between those. There are a lot of factors conspiring to drive rates up for wastewater utilities. One is that renewal and replacement. And so if we're not taking care of our infrastructure, that leads to problems with service, and that's usually, for most users, and maybe the ones that are concerned about the rate, they may not see that, right? That may not affect them directly, but system-wide, it's a concern. We know that the capitally intensive nature of sewer utilities leads us to large investment requirements. The other dynamic happening here is regulatory pressure, which gets.
That's what I was wondering if you're going to.
Right. So water quality standards and the thresholds to which your utility operation needs to meet water quality effluent are also on the move, and so that drives a portion of your cost structure as well. It's not unique to you. It's an industry-wide issue as well.
Yeah, that's the point I was hoping you would come to. Thank you.
So the first thing that we look at in financial planning is where we see your top-line revenue. The green bar in this chart represents what we estimated in last year's plan. The blue is this year's plan. As you can see, over the near term, over the next 2 or 3 years, it's very comparable to what we had before, slightly higher. That flips a little bit in the out years. One of the dynamics affecting rate increases is usage per account and how your customers use systems. And again, this is a national issue as well. Efficient appliances and awareness or fixtures, the lower flow fixtures that are implemented in new homes or remodeled homes, all reduce the flow requirements, the volume, the way that your customers use the system. And that puts additional pressure on your rates as well. In your community, due to the growth that your community experiences really helps offset a lot of those dynamics. but there is an underlying decline in your use per account, too, that we need to account for, and the financial plan takes it into consideration. When we turn our attention to operating costs, what you see here is perhaps a step diagram that walks you through the major changes in your operating budget. So we have a 2018 budget of about $65 million. The first two adjustments here are related to existing personnel, so this will be increases in merit and health benefits and other benefits, and then the county transfer and risk management payments that happen. Beyond that blue line in the chart there are what we would consider those requests for additional resources. The new FTE, you've heard a little bit about that this afternoon, is 5 additional resources, $420,000 impact to your budget next year. And then the other kind of non-Tomahawk or non-treatment expenses, the chemical expense, you'll see at the far right at an incremental $200,000. Everything in the middle, and really the bulk of the change in your operating costs is related to treatment expense, both at KCMO as well as the Tomahawk strategy. The first portion of KCMO, so we have a $6.7 million increase in cost there. It's been planned to a large extent, but as Susan mentioned earlier, we did see a higher rate increase in their service than we anticipated. We had forecasted 7. We're seeing a little more than 10%. I would estimate of the KCMO rate increase at $2.3 million, we probably expected about $800,000 less expense there. Due to the rate increase, we're seeing some additional pressure. The blue bar, the $4.3 million, $4.4 million you see is really the Tomahawk strategy. So that is shutting Tomahawk down, pushing more flow to KCMO while construction is happening. That does come with some benefit. So when you cease operations at Tomahawk, you should see some reduction in some of your variable costs, particularly power. But some of the cost of operating that facility will come down. 1.1 million in Tomahawk savings is what's shown in the graph here. So net, the majority of your increase in O&M is related to your treatment expense. What you'll see here in a moment, we'll talk about rate increases. We can accommodate this change within the financial plan that we've previously presented, but that's part of what's driving our cost up a little higher than that average of 6%. So this is total operating expense, and again, green is what we anticipated last year, blue is what we're showing now. And you'll see in 2018 through 2021 a little pressure on O&M compared to what we had previously estimated. 2022 is higher than what we had estimated in last year's plan because the construction period for Tomahawk is just a little different. We're going to have one final payment for KCMO hitting in 2022. But after that, your Tomahawk facility is operational, and you can see your O&M expense steps down dramatically. It's really, there's two benefits to be had here. One is that obviously O&M is coming down a substantial amount. That's good. But that also is your most volatile operating expense. So in rainy weather, when infiltration and inflow happens and we have to lean on Kansas City, Missouri more for treatment expense, that risk will subside because of the capacity you're building in Tomahawk, and it gives you greater certainty over your costs. You can see in 2023 through 2026 some favorability. And this is caused by the additional flow that is expected to be diverted as a result of the Leawood diversion project that wasn't anticipated in last year's plan. So there is some incremental benefit. We expect O&M to be lower in the long term compared to what we estimated last year. Now let's talk a little bit about debt service. The green line in this chart represents what we estimated debt service payments to be in last year's plan. And the bars represent what we estimate in this year's plan. And the first thing I would point out is in 2019, you can see that our bar is cresting a little bit above the line. That is a function of the higher interest costs that we're carrying as a result of the two issuance strategy with the Tomahawk approach. But you can see over the course of time that we are lower than that line. We are gaining some favorability. This is in part due to the anticipated benefit of that strategy, the two debt issuance strategy. So overall, our long-term debt is a little bit favorable. There's also been a change, I should mention, in the deferral strategy. Springstead has extended that deferral strategy out. The principal really doesn't come on fully until 2023 and 2024, and that's when you see that bar really step up. So if we look at your total cash commitments, operating and capital in the blue, and compare that to revenue under existing rates in the green, that difference is really what we are trying to close with any proposed revenue adjustments. And I'll flip to the next slide and show you the proposed revenue increases. Green is last year's plan. Blue is this year's plan. The plans are very much in lockstep, nearly identical. The increase in 2019 is 7 3/4. You're a little over 7.6% in 2020 and 2021. You need those increases really to get the debt issued and manage the transition to the new Tomahawk. After that, we expect your rate increase pressure to come down. So we have an overall average here of about 5.6%, but my expectation is long-term you should see increases below that average. I would say, too, we have taken a longer look this year, a longer outlook. I think Susan mentioned that we have a Nelson project coming on. We do a long-range outlook, and that's dependent on a lot of variables. But at the moment, we don't see any landmines. So if I were to show you 2028 in this graph, I wouldn't expect that to be a nasty surprise at this point. So we're also trying to take a very long-term look, kind of commensurate with your planning cycle for your capital improvement plan. And I think what you're seeing here is a sustainable approach so long as we don't see unexpected, higher than anticipated inflation, interest rates, dramatic changes in use of your system, those sorts of things. The two primary financial measures that we manage to are operating reserves and debt service coverage. So we'll talk about operating reserves first. We are, as a matter of policy, striving to be between 90 days O&M and 180 days O&M. We have traditionally looked at your use of debt service reserves as one way to stabilize rates. So we can draw those reserves down gradually and manage the transition to Tomahawk and the higher funding requirement there. And that's exactly what we're doing in this plan. We expect your days of O&M to decline to about 90 to 95 days. That's at the lower end of your policy range, but we feel like that is a reasonable place to be given the lower operating expense risk that you should have, which is primarily coming from your KCMO payments. The red line represents how quickly those reserves would be consumed if we chose not to increase rates. It's a very rapid decline.
David, I have a question and exposure to the Kansas City, Missouri rate structure. After Tomahawk's fully operational, we had very limited exposure to Kansas City, Missouri after that time.
Right. We would estimate the Kansas City, Missouri payments to be in the neighborhood of $5 to $6 million a year.
Okay. The only concern I have on that, just when I'm reading in the paper, that the wastewater and water bills today for a lot of customers in Kansas City, Missouri is more than their electric or gas bills. They have quite a bit different rate structure than we have. So I guess my concern, and I saw that 4.7 projection, I just don't know if that's going to hold or not, that their rates are tremendously different for, looks like, in the future than us. So and I guess they'll have to, same thing, someone else will look in the future, there'll be a tipping point to see if that needs to be addressed in the future potentially.
Right, and they're managing through a consent decree. It's been very costly for them, and rate increases on their system have been double-digit for a long period of time. So yeah, that is a risk. I think their hope is they can manage that, maybe a little lower going forward, but that's also dependent on a number of things.
Thank you.
Okay.
Debt service coverage is the other financial measure that we manage to. You're required to maintain 1.1 times debt service coverage. As a matter of policy, we strive to be at 1.2 at a minimum. What you'll see here is that we expect over the long term for you to be in that 1.2 to 1.3 range, which again we feel is a pretty comfortable place for your utility to be. We will see a small spike in the short term in 2022 as a result of the debt issuance strategy, but that comes down to normal levels pretty rapidly. So the last couple of slides here will talk about proposed rates and the impact on your typical bills. The service charge will increase, is proposed to increase at $1.10 per bill. Sorry about that. 55 cents a month. You bill bi-monthly, so we're talking about a 55 cent a month increase in the service charge. The volume charge increases by 54 cents per 1,000 gallons. And if we look at what that does to your projected minimum bills, that median user today on your system is paying a bill of about $35.58 a month. When we apply the proposed rates, that would increase that bill to about $38.28, so an increase of about $2.70 for that particular user. We also look at how these, pardon me, these rates and typical bills compare regionally. And so what we show here are really 3 years of data. Blue is 2017, red is 2018, and in cases where we can see adopted rates for 2019, we show that as well. So for Johnson County wastewater, under proposed rates, your 2019 bill for a median user would be about $38.28. It is very competitive and very close, and in many cases lower than what we see happening regionally, particularly as it relates to Independence in Kansas City, Missouri. The NACWA average is I mentioned the indice that would show their rates expected to increase 5 to 6% a year. That's a national number that NACWA produces at about $45 a month.
How many wastewater agencies, that may not be the right term, but organizations are there in the region that arguably Johnson County would compete with for businesses and homes? The national average is fine, but if somebody's going to locate in this region, they don't care about the national average, but they might look at least Summit in Kansas City, Kansas. But how many are there, and how do we fall out within that group? Some of them better, others maybe not so good.
What we're showing you are the ones we feel are most comparable in the region. We have taken a broader look at typical bills, but you run into scaling issues. So some of those communities are very small systems or smaller systems, different types of users, different wholesale arrangements. So you can get into...
But like Gardner has a facility, so...
Yep.
How do they compare? Are they better, worse, about the same?
I don't have that information with me today. I could get it.
That's more of a curiosity. Thank you.
Yeah. The last table here is just your proposed rate table. So this would be what would be submitted for your consideration later in this process. It shows your retail and your wholesale rates and your high-strength rates. And that concludes my comments. May I address any questions you might have?
Susan, let me ask you, how much of this information do we share in our billing process? Let's say the first bill for the next year goes out in January or February. Do we show a rate comparison? Do we have information that people can understand that what impacts their specific bill? For instance, many of the calls I get, the first question I ask is water usage compared to the previous year or years. Mm-hmm. And that will usually identify, where the rate increase came from. But again, water usage, federal regulations, and comparison with similar systems in the metro. Do we currently share any of that information?
We do, actually. So as part of the first bill of the year, there's always an explanation of rates brochure that goes out, as well as some information about other programs that we offer, so that it provides the very information you just described, how their bill is calculated and what are the types of things that are impacting the cost of service or the rates that we are using. Actually, I think we have this information, the metro comparison. If it's not on our website yet, we're going to start sharing that on the website to sort of help our customers understand where we fit in the rest of our peer agencies as well.
Yeah. Mr. Allen.
I've always understood that wastewater is one of the largest users of electricity as a customer for Kansas City Power and Light and
We are.
other large utilities, and the cost of chemicals. So those two components, I've always thought is not the only driver, but one of the main drivers.
But, yes.
And then if you may want to compare what rate increases the power and light companies have had possibly in that, if it's favorable, I guess, is the way to explain it. But I've clearly understood, I think at one time, Johnson County wastewater was the largest customer of Kansas City Power and Light in the county. That may not be true today, but in the past. So huge electricity user, a lot of chemicals go in there.
Absolutely. So yes, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a good point. I remember an extended conversation with one constituent who was convinced that his wastewater bill should never be higher than his water bill, his Water One bill, and tried to explain that there were different cost factors involved. But anyway, good point.
Yeah, it's not unusual for wastewater to be more. We're more regulated. If you think about it, we have more pollutants to remove, essentially, in most cases. So, yes, sir.
Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a couple questions not on Mr. Newman's presentation, but on reflection, earlier comments. Ms. Pekarik, you had mentioned the addition of a customer service and billing operations analyst. Will that be impacting the performance measures you presented or some other performance measures? Was it related to the plans review within allotted time or some other component of that? I wasn't sure.
The analyst position, I would connect to our customer service satisfaction as well as the customer billing collection complaints measures.
Okay, because your satisfaction's already over 90%.
Yeah.
So you're shooting for 100% then? Okay.
Good.
And this question is directed to Mr. Neufeld. Scott, I'm sorry. At least I think I'll direct it to you. I noticed Ms. Pekarik and a couple others, there are measures of employee turnover. Is that a department-wide measure that you ask for? I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I mean it's a fair comparison because it can give you some indication of employee satisfaction and so forth. But is that something that all departments are supposed to do and some don't, or is it totally at their discretion? I mean, under 10% for wastewater, is that good or bad? Because anecdotally, you know, we've had questions about the sheriff's office and turnover and IT and turnover, but do we do that consistently throughout the organization, or should we?
Well, HR tracks that by department and keeps an eye on it. We, from a budget office perspective, don't specifically ask departments to show that as a measure. In a lot of ways, we're in a lot of different lines of business, and so the ones where turnover is more of a factor tend to be the ones that use that or focus on that more heavily as a measure. So we don't ask people to. HR keeps an eye on it, and as you know from your time here, some departments it's a more ongoing battle. The IT type departments typically have a lot more pressure, and then others are more cyclical depending on the economy or that particular market, whether it's hot. So it's something that HR keeps an eye on, departments keep an eye on it, but we do not ask them to make that a measure.
Well, then to bounce back to Ms. McCarrick, is turnover an issue for you? 10% seems to be a constant for you over the years. I mean, are you suggesting something here, or would you like to see it lower, or is this? I mean, what do I do with this measure? Because you're asking for 5 new people. Will this reduce turnover, or is it inconsequential?
Well, certainly turnover, I guess this measure was established back when we established our strategic business plan initially. And so 10% was sort of the threshold that we established as what we wanted to shoot for, being less than 10%. You know, a certain amount of turnover will make sense in your organization. Is that the right size? I don't know that I have an answer for you today.
Okay.
But we are, I would say, you know, in areas where turnover risk is great, Scott mentioned the market, those are areas where we continue to work with HR to develop ways to provide career ladder opportunities and other things so that we can incentivize staff staying.
Thank you.
Okay. Continue. Is that it?
Okay, we're done.
Okay, if we're finished with wastewater, transportation is next.
Thank
So
you.
we'll get those folks up here at the table.
Some more old in. Dick, just so you don't wait, I'll say big box buses, just so we can get that out of the way. Okay.
So we're just getting the laptop switched over, so we'll be ready to go in just a second.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Later. Yeah, sure. Right down.
Okay, sorry about that. We just had to get it switched to our laptop from Burns and Max. I'm going to turn it over to Gail Kaufman, and she'll make the introductions for transportation.
Good afternoon. With me is Josh Powers, the business liaison with the county, Dick Gerald, and Jameson Otten. I will actually going to defer over to Josh to make some opening comments.
Thanks, Gail. Chairman, Commissioners. Josh Powers, business liaison. Before we begin, sorry, my green light wasn't on. Josh Powers, business liaison in the manager's office. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize Chip Corcoran, who's in the audience. He's the chairman of the Johnson County Transportation Council. Chip does a lot of work for us through JCTC, and we appreciate his being here today. I'm joined by two guests from ATA at the table, Dick Gerald, Senior Vice President of Planning and Development at ATA, and Jameson Otten, Vice President of Regional Service Delivery and Innovation. Also in the audience are Mick Letcher and Chuck Ferguson, familiar faces. So before we begin on the first slide, I'd like to turn over to Dick. He has a few comments he'd like to make.
Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here today and really express the appreciation that ATA has for the partnership with Johnson County. There are good things happening in Johnson County. We appreciate the leadership of the Board of County Commissioners in the willingness to try some new things, such as the new service to the logistics park in Edgerton. And good things are happening with ridership, and we're looking forward to continuing our relationship with both the board and with staff when it comes to transit.
Thanks, Dick. To begin, I'm going to step through some recent accomplishments that have happened in the transportation area, and then I'll turn it back to Dick to talk about some upcoming developments. So turning to the first slide here, as Dick mentioned, the newly implemented Jobs Access route to Logistics Park, Kansas City at the BNSF Intermodal began on April 2nd of this year. And while these are very preliminary numbers, we're only 6 weeks in, ridership over the same period in 2017 is up 21%. So, looking good, but we're going to continue to market the service and outreach to employers and employees, as well as the area of Gardner and Edgerton. We also expanded the Freedom on Demand pilot that had been occurring in the northeast part of Johnson County. That happened in April as well. And I'm going to pause right here to turn over to Jameson Otten. He's going to explain to you what Freedom on Demand is, what it does, and how it's been operating.
Good afternoon. Freedom on Demand started last May, and what it is an app-based service that allows folks, particularly those who are using paratransit services, to be able to use a same-day on-demand service at a lower cost than it is to provide traditional paratransit services. So through an app, they put in their origin, destination, if they need a particular type of vehicle, and they're able to be on their way rather than having to know the day before where they want to go and wait for a half-hour window for the vehicle to come.
Thanks, Jameson. Moving on to the next bullet point, you will recall that Transit was granted additional funding in fiscal year 2016 for service expansion on Metcalf and 75th Street. Since that investment, ridership is up on those routes 16% and 19% respectively. And at the beginning of the year, we made a concentrated marketing effort focused on the K10 connector, and ridership on the K10 connector is up 2.8% over April of 2017. That reverses a 5-year decline in ridership, and following the marketing effort, which we are continuing, the sales of single express or suburban express single ride passes are up substantially in the first quarter of 2018. So while we are getting through spring break and those times when we provide less service, we do expect that ridership on that route will continue to increase. Also pertaining to the K10 connector, the Memorandum of Understanding for increased funding from the City of Lawrence is signed and in place for a multi-year agreement. Lastly, on this slide, I'm pleased to report that the mental health transportation pilot that was funded through Transit RER in fiscal year 18 has exceeded our goal of a 40% increase in clients served. We are currently serving, or mental health is serving 50% more people than they were prior to the fiscal year 2018 RER that came from Transit, so we're very pleased about that. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dick to talk about some upcoming near-term transit developments.
Josh, can I go back
Yes, sir.
to your second bulletin? You talk about, second bullet, you talk about 19% increase. Numbers-wise, what is that?
Sure. So you will recall that you were given a range of ridership numbers back in 2015, expected ridership over a 3-year period. So we did in 2017 on Metcalf 42,000 rides, well, 42.6 actually. And so based on what we predicted would happen back in 2015, we're getting about 70% of the way up to what we expected.
But that 16% increase would then be, 4,000, about 7,000, something like that?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Sure. Dick?
You heard Aaron mention at the beginning of the presentations today the comprehensive operations analysis that we are conducting with a consultant of all of the routes in the Johnson County system. We will be presenting recommendations tomorrow to the Johnson County Transportation Council and discussing those with them. This will be the second time we've discussed the results of that study and where it's going. There are a number of recommendations that are going to be made. It will affect more than half of the routes in the system, and the recommendations range from small, such as changes in schedules, minor changes in alignment, to significant in terms of increases frequency or extensions, and in some cases, some eliminations of some segments or some routes altogether. So all of those will go through a vetting process with JCTC. We'll be discussing that with this board in June, and there'll also be a public comment process for any of those we want to go forward with before they're implemented. So it's a major effort. We're pleased with the direction it's taking, but obviously want to do further consultation and communication with both the board and with the public. Evening service on Metcalf and 75th Street, the two spines. As this board has approved, that service will begin in July of this year. So we're excited about that improvement. 3 trails. Three Trails is a transit center in South Kansas City, Missouri. And last year, you'll remember, we requested funding from KDOT to provide job access service from that facility to the logistics park. KDOT provided that funding, and that service will begin in July from Three Trails to the southwest Johnson County area. It's an area that was reflected by the employers. It's one of those areas they recruit from. So again, we'll try that service there. This is not a permanent funding source from KDOT, but it's an opportunity to see if there is a market there to get people to jobs in southwest Johnson County. And then finally, we recognize that big box buses are not the answer for all parts of the region. We are aware that traditional fixed route really doesn't fit everywhere in the region, particularly in places where we have lower density, more suburban development like Johnson County. So we are continuing to look for other solutions. We have a contract right now with a firm called Transloc, and we are looking to them to see if there's an opportunity to do another microtransit on-demand pilot. We're looking for some pilot locations in both Johnson County and Missouri. We have some ideas in mind. Again, we are in basically the consultation stages with this consultant firm. We think the possibilities are good for a pilot program that would be an on-demand service, an app-driven service, again, microtransit. But at this point in time, we don't have any firm recommendations yet. We hope to come up with some of those before the end of this year. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if that's appropriate.
Mr. Brown, did you have a question? Scratch in your head. Okay.
Thank you.
What about discussion about alternative forms? I talk about an Uber-type concept or something like that.
So this concept that we're talking to Transloc with is like that. It would be an Uber-like concept, again, app-driven, on-demand. You request the service to come to you, and it takes you to the location you want to go to. We have to sort through the data. We're actually doing a lot of data analysis right now. We're actually doing simulations of that to see if it looks like it's a cost-effective solution and where it might be most cost-effective to deploy
I'm
that.
assuming there would be a cost differential over the traditional.
Yes, obviously,
route
you're providing
service.
individual trips. There is a cost differential. What we need to look at and see if there is sufficient demand and sufficient trip sharing possibilities to bring that cost down.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Ashcraft.
Follow on to that, Mr. Chairman. That Uber-esque concept makes sense. I hope you are pairing up that with asking employers or those who directly benefit from having that transit connection to, I'll use the term subsidize or directly support that rather than having it dispersed to taxpayers generally. I know you've done a little bit of that down south, but I hope you're very aggressive on that. So you're kind of shaking your head in the affirmative, so I trust that's, you've had some.
I agree with the point, and we are pursuing that extensively right now in the logistics park area in southwest Johnson County. In terms of this microtransit pilot, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
But when it comes to deploying the service, I agree with you. I think it's a very important piece of service that needs to be supported both by presenting information to employees and by the employers actually helping provide some financial support.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a follow-on, and I appreciate your comments about taking a strategic perspective in terms of the services and the routes and so forth, and I commend you. I think you have demonstrated that that is part of your cultural DNA in terms of your business processes, and that's great. I want you to continue that, but I was looking at some total ridership numbers from 2017, what you estimated to be like 593,000, but the actual was 551. This is from the budget book, and then it seems to be coming up a little bit, but somewhat behind. And ridership is not so much an issue because then I got to looking at the actual fare box recovery. And in 2015 and 16 and 17, it was between 19 and 20%. But then here we've got for 17, 18, and 19, less than 9%. I mean, that's seems like a significant reduction in fare box recovery. And I I just didn't see that as part of your budget approach here in terms of how to bolster that. I mean, is less than 10% just going to be the norm going forward, or do you see us returning to at least 20%? So what's the goal, short-term and long-term?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. You're absolutely correct that we have seen a reduction in fare box recovery. In about 2013, our fare box recovery was approaching 40%, and that was before gas prices and before we raised the rate actually on the K-10 connector, which is our highest ridership route. And since then, we have seen continuing declines. Part of the COA is to address that very point, because the fare box recovery is tied to ridership and increasing ridership. So marketing is a component, but from a service delivery standpoint, we want to, for example, part of the COA recommendations were to look at longer trips and how to split those in a cost-neutral way into shorter trips with serving with existing vehicles, so that it's more attractive for clients and making them aware of the different services that we provide. So increasing ridership is tied directly to increasing that fare box recovery number, and that's what the COA is focused on.
Okay. Well, but over the next 3 years, it's not going to have any impact, is what this is suggesting? I mean, how long do you think that's going to take?
So we are very conservative when we forecast in out years, because we don't want to get into the place where we have promised that we were going to do something and it hasn't materialized. We do expect that these would bear returns starting in 2019, which was when these, pursuant to the board process, that these service adjustments would go into place.
Okay.
Well,
If I could add to
oil's
that.
about $70 a barrel now, projected to go to 90 or 100.
Bite your tongue.
Would anticipate that ridership might pick up and fares might increase.
If I could add, we are also contracting with KU to take a look at regional ridership. Johnson County is actually the bright spot in terms of transit ridership regionally, but we want to take a look and see what's going on with ridership. Is there anything more we can do to try to bring that up, and actually looking at that from a regional context with KU?
Mr. Allen.
Actually, the comments I was going to make have been made. The Johnson County numbers on ridership, frankly, are much better than on the Missouri side, and nationally, obviously, we wish they were better. So from that standpoint, we're doing a good job. And then I noticed yesterday, personally, the gas went up 16 cents a gallon, and the K-10 route, a lot of that is predicated on fuel prices. If they go to $3.50 or whatever, the ridership could go up. So there's drivers that are out of our control on some of that, but a lot of positive things happening. I think what Dick talked about, that we're having a meeting in the morning to look at the overall route structure and to come up with an overall system that makes sense and is more financially stable and is reflective of the marketplace today, is frankly what will come to the board in June. And there'll be some changes. When you make this, there's some winners and losers on some of these routes, but it's been a very thorough process to get us there, and there's several other steps that need to be made. But I just want to emphasize, being on the Kansas City Transit Board Authority, that I'm very pleased and with the overall representation and how things are going from a Johnson County perspective and again, a metro-wide perspective. These are difficult times in transportation nationally, uncertain funding, and it's a complicated business. And adjusting today's market to Uber, right-sizing vehicles, I think they clearly understand all that, and we're moving in the right direction. So thank you.
Mr. Brown, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Chairman. I did. Just a quick question. When it comes to, as the Chairman said, $90 or $100 barrel oil, I think it's reasonable to expect that our ridership is going to go up. Who ultimately makes a decision about when it's the right time to increase the fare to help offset the cost? Who makes that decision? Is there some magic trip to that? Where does that occur? When does that occur? Where and when, I guess, is the question.
Sure, Commissioner. Appreciate the question, and there are probably several answers to that question. I mean, ultimately, the decision would be a policy decision for the Board of County Commissioners. What we've seen is there is a direct tie to the fare price and ridership. And so what we saw back in 2013 when we raised the price in the K-10 connector, it happened to coincide with the gas prices going down, and so what we saw was huge losses in ridership. So it's a bit of an art and it's a bit of a science. We want to be cautious because this is a service that does cater to folks who may not have other transportation options. So when that fare goes up, it further limits their mobility. Chuck, or Dick, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, it's also ultimately an analysis that we have to make a recommendation to this board for a decision. And Josh is correct. You could cut fares, but there's not a corresponding increase in ridership in the same way when you increase fares. It's not a one-for-one comparison.
But what is the trip then that would cause that conversation, that discussion, and then further a recommendation to come forward to us for consideration? Or are we supposed to be monitoring that?
I think there's the way that we would approach that is we have just standardized the regional fare structure so that when you get on a bus in Kansas City, Missouri, or Jackson County, or KCK, and you come here, you pay the same fare for the same corresponding kind of service. When you start to change that fare structure, for example, if it's more to ride in Johnson County than it is in KCK, you're limiting the attractiveness of those folks to come into Johnson County and use our service. So it's something that we have to keep in mind, but again, it is a policy decision, and it comes back perhaps to what Commissioner Ashcraft was saying when we look at our fare box recovery. If you jack up the price because we see good ridership, it's possible that you stymie that and you knock that ridership back down. So it is a balancing act.
Okay.
Chairman, may I add to that answer? Just working closely with transit over the last few years, staff does monitor that pretty closely, both ATA staff and our staff, and it's also discussed monthly at the Transit Council. At least performance measures on ridership and fare box is in the monthly reports. So although they may not discuss whether to raise or lower monthly, it is monitored by both staff and the Transit Council. No, you are not expected to know when to do that. We would recommend it to you, but certainly you're welcome to ask questions, and we should report periodically.
Okay.
I'm not speaking for everybody on the dais here, just for me, but I would appreciate after each transit meeting having some kind of a briefing, and I mean brief briefing, like just 5 bullet points, kind of what got discussed and where are we. It can be the same each month, the same matrix, whatever it is. It's, ooh, I used an Ashcraft word there. So,
Okay.
whatever it is, I would appreciate just seeing something.
Love you, man.
We'll be happy to provide that, Commissioner.
Okay.
Moving on, so what we've covered so far for 2018 and what we have planned for 2019, we have the goal of increasing ridership by 10% by the end of fiscal year 2018, and then to further grow ridership by 5% in fiscal year 2019. A lot of this is tied to our marketing effort. Our current marketing effort has included billboards along I-35, direct outreach to employers and employees, and our social media advertising, which is geo-targeted to the New Century and Logistics Park area, has realized 360,000 online impressions. We have a robust marketing plan that's going to continue for the remainder of 2018 to include online and print advertising, earned media, video assets, and continued outreach to employers. With the expansion of the Freedom on Demand pilot, we have a goal of migrating 10 to 12% of existing Freedom riders, formerly Special Edition, to this new, more cost-effective service. A 10% migration would amount to about 6,800 rides and a cost saving of over $100,000 a year. Lastly, we continue to right-size the transit fleet, and we're on track to reduce the number of large coaches in our fleet by 32% by 2023. I'm going to turn over to Gail Kaufman here. She's going to give a high-level overview of our budget.
As you can see from the graph, the budget for 2019 will be close to $15 million, down from 2018. On this next graph, you'll see where the differences are. Most of, in that case, are capital. The biggest drivers in the total expenditures for transportation are the contracts and capital spending.
And there's a legend there at the top. Thanks, Gail. The blue there is the transportation contracts, and orange is the capital expenditure, green is fuel, and the purple are the other contracts that we have for professional services. So you can see where the drivers are. So moving on to the CIP and our bus replacement program, in fiscal year 2019, we have about $2.2 million programmed for vehicles. That would purchase 10 vehicles. $457,000 of that would be the local match portion. We're buying 4 30-foot buses, 2 cutaway vehicles, and 4 transporter vehicles. Quick note on those procurements, the 4 30-foot buses will be replacing 4 40-foot buses, so we are dedicated to that right-sizing effort. The transporter vehicles are a kind of pilot in-between vehicle that we're looking to maybe supplant the use of cutaways, just a smaller, more cost-effective vehicle. On BPI, or basic passenger infrastructure, the total there is $927,000. $177,000 of that is for concrete pads, branches, that kind of infrastructure to help riders access the system. And then we have $750,000 set aside for a regional fare box project. Lastly, we set aside $250,000 every year from the transit fund, and that's used to match vehicle purchases. This last slide shows some trend information on our major services. On the left, you can see ridership for all of our transit services, and as has been pointed out, 2017 really shows a stop of the 5-year, multi-year decline in ridership, and even a little bit of an uptick. As it also has been mentioned by various folks, Johnson County has outperformed regional and national trends, which declines are more substantial and continuing. The increases you see there from 2017 to 2018 and 2018 to 2019 are 4% and 3% respectively. Again, the goal is 10% in 18 and 5 in 19, but we are conservative in our forecasting. On the graph on the right there shows trend information for our major services. The blue line is the K-10 connector, and you can see a pretty dramatic reversal of that 5-year declining trend. The red line is our paratransit service, and I want to point out that ridership on paratransit has been increasing in recent years, but over the last 4 years, we've reduced the cost per trip by 26%, and that goes back to some of the efforts that we made with on-demand service, taxi voucher, and being able to utilize smaller, more cost-efficient vehicles. Just briefly, the green line is Metcalf, which again has seen a 16% increase over 2016. 75th Street is the purple line and has seen that 19% gain over the same time period. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions? Mr. Atchcraft.
Back to the issue of measures. Do you, Mr. Powers, do we do any kind of outcome measures, satisfaction measures with riders or businesses or taxpayers periodically to see how well we're doing, if we're meeting the needs and expectations? I know we've done some rider surveys in the past, but is that something that we do ongoing, and how are we looking in that regard?
Yes, sir. We do a regular survey through First Transit where we measure customer satisfaction, and that's done by random surveying of clients. They quantify success or an acceptable level of client satisfaction at 92%. First Transit is routinely over 95%. So the people who utilize the service.
Is that done periodically, annually?
Multiple times through the year.
Multiple times, okay.
And then I think the recent citizen survey shows that there are areas for improvement, but that overall people are interested in the service and open to using it more.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to bring airport folks up next, and Dave Rotney is their analyst, so he will introduce them, and we'll get switched over in just a second here.
Okay. Dave Rotney with the Budget Office. With me at the table here is Larry Peet, the Deputy Director of the Airport Commission. I'm going to turn it over to Larry. He's going to cover the next couple slides here.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for allowing us the opportunity to come in, and I also want to thank everybody for the help and support that we've received over the past several years through the storm last season and the county manager's office, all the different departments in the county. It's truly appreciated. So the airport, our mission is to offer and develop transportation facilities that is an asset to the county, and we really are. As a self-sufficient agency within the county, we strive to maintain that self-sufficiency, to grow that. And we have to do that. There's an overarching umbrella to our operations that the core value is safety. We do everything with that in mind, from repairing our runways to maintaining our runways. We have to paint them, make sure the landing aids are bright and visible from the air. We maintain our wildlife program, that we make sure that the grass is cut in order to lower the wildlife, the ground rabbits and mice, in order to maintain and control that. It goes into maintaining our fences. And that safety, it applies also to our rail operations. We make sure that our operations, that the rail, the gauge or the distance between the rails, it has to be maintained, and make sure that it's the right width. That our personnel are trained, that they're operating in a safe and efficient manner. And then going to our water district, our water supply, our water distribution, that those are meeting or exceeding the KDHE standards that we need in order to supply the water to our 65 multinational companies that accompany our business park. Those are consumables. And so overarching that safety is our common goal. And that is what drives our days, and that also drives our growth. If we're safe and the companies there and the aircraft operating in and out are seeing the care that we're taking in that facility, it encourages that growth. And so to develop and operate the airports in a business-like manner, and to strive to make the premier multimodal facility in the region. And that will drive, if we do all that correctly, that drives our self-sufficiency to maintain that.
And so as for their budget for next year, we're looking at about $6.8 million. That's up about $300,000 from where it was in 2018, for this year, actually. We may end up coming back later in the year, airport might, and do a use of reserves. We may need to make some modifications there. I know there's some unknown expenses that we're likely to incur for 2018. So I just kind of wanted to let you know that may happen. But as for right now, we're at $6.5 million, going to $6.8 for 2019. Budget FTEs are staying stable at 18.25. As for projects, there's several CIP projects here. The one I want to highlight, and you'll notice there's a difference in the number there. The New Century Retention Pond improvement, I think we had listed in your book here and the other book at 710. That's come down. We think our portion, the airport's portion, is about $400,000. Now that's a larger project. It's a stormwater management, a SMAC project. So the $400,000 is just the airport's portion of that project, which is roughly about 30% of that project cost. And then there's a couple other projects in here. I don't know if Larry wants to.
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit more to some of these. That retention pond, that's a pond that dates back 1942. It actually has a land bridge that runs between the two ponds. It's actually two. Used to be a railroad track, a spur that ran into one of the supply buildings. So in an effort to increase the capacity for floodwater retention in that pond, we're going through and we're going to remove that land bridge on there. There's also some work on the banks that needs to be accomplished on that. Through the years, it's eroded down, and its stability is questionable. And then the western outflow, that needs to be repaired, that runs underneath New Century Parkway and onward to the west. Another project for the CIP is the reconstruction of the northeast apron at Executive Airport. That's $192,000. This is a program that is funded 90/10, usually by the FAA. We don't have that funding yet, but we don't have any reason to think we wouldn't get that at this point. The project is, it's a ramp, and I've been up here in front of you before and talked about how the cracking and crumbling of the pavement, that some of the older stuff that we have out there. This is one of them that, hats off to our staff, they've gone through and preserved it over the years. And it just always ranks low because it's a ramp area on the FAA funding, so we're hopeful that we'll finally get through that.
Yeah, and then the other few projects that we have listed here, obviously there's a road resurfacing project out of New Century. A roof that needs to be replaced on the maintenance building out there, and then the last project we have listed for funding or proposed for funding for 2019 is the first part of a locomotive shed. We're looking to maybe do some design work in 19 with a construction plan for 2020. So with that, I'll turn it back to the board. Any questions you have for myself or Larry or Aaron's here as well? We're more than happy to take some
Let
questions.
me refer back to Mr. Otto's original comment. Maybe I misunderstood. I thought something was said about a $6 million runway expenditure.
That is a 2018 project that we're hopeful to get that funding from FAA this year. It'll be too late in order to start that project for this year, and that the actual work would take place next year.
Okay.
That's an actual removal and replacement of the runway at Executive Airport.
Okay. Other questions, Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pete, this is your first time in this role, I believe, so congratulations, good job, and you must be a man of great tolerance for what you've had to put up with in the last couple of years, so thank you for that.
I appreciate that, thanks.
Very good. Couple of questions. You indicated that you believe that our facilities were the premier multimodal facilities, I guess, in the region, as you put it. And I was wondering, how do we demonstrate that? How do we measure that and talk about that? I mean, we can believe that, but how do we say that in comparisons? In terms of visitors or revenues or satisfaction or growth, or I mean, how do you espouse that when someone says, well, no, my airport in Poto, Missouri is better than yours? I mean, how do we do that? How do you do that?
Sure, that's a great question, thanks. Part of that is vision at the moment, and as I said, we're self-sufficient, so some of the success has to be viewed from a standpoint of our ability to maintain that self-sufficiency and to grow that from a profit, from a revenue standpoint. We have Southwest County EDC that performs the tenant retention interviews with our tenants on the airport. We have our tenants that I was just informed 2 days ago that one of our tenants is investing in some internal wastewater treatment facilities. That's an indication they have every indication to stay on our business park. When I talk to other businesses out there and they call me and find out about what it is that we're doing out there and what's available, try to tell them, number one, we're one of I think only 2 or 3 true multimodal facilities, meaning air, rail, and surface transportation. The other one is surface and rail, and then we have the other airports in the region. But we have this triad that we're actually able to market, and part of that is just the vision for the airport. To come in there, and we do. You go over and look at LPKC. It's brand new, shiny, typical brand new construction. How do you compete with that? Well, over the years we've tried to increase some of our aesthetics on the airfield, on the business park, with taking down the trees that are no longer, some of them were unsafe. We took those out, replaced those with some plantings. We're constantly doing something out there to try to forward that up. But the caution is that we have to do it wisely. We have to do it smartly. We can't just and plan. We have to plan that. So the infrastructure investments that we have out there, all of that goes together to create the package that we're selling to the community and to the nation.
Very good. Well, I was going to make comment. Last year, for a variety of reasons, I don't think there were any performance measures related to the airport presented. And then compared to a couple of years ago, there are several new ones. And some of them that are new, or a couple of them are related to bird strikes. And you've got actuals and estimates to be zero. So, I mean, is that an indicator of the premiership, or what? I mean, zero is what you want, but how do we? If you have one, does that mean you're doing a bad job? I don't understand
Well, and
why
some,
this
we're
is in
still
here.
looking at some of those performance measures. In my eyes, zero is the goal. We can't have zero, we have to have zero accidents out there from an aviation, from a rail,
Yeah.
from a water standpoint, and from the business park. I can't help a mechanical failure on an aircraft, but I can certainly help by making sure that the
Right.
pavement out there is marked correctly, that we're addressing any pavement issues, cracks, holes, breakout that happens, in no time. You can be out there and 5 minutes later there's a hole. And so continuous inspection programs that our staff perform on a daily and several times a day. So those are some of the performance measures I look at, like rail. We can't have a derailment. It's zero tolerance for that. Now, if it's a failure, mechanical failure of a tenant's car that comes in, I certainly, we can maybe look at that, but we don't have control over that. But what we do have control over, that's where zero tolerance comes in.
And do you do any satisfaction measures with tenants or visitors or pilots or?
We do with our tenants of our business park, as I said, with the Southwest County or the Southwest Johnson County EDC. There's a fair amount of communication that goes on. Pilots call in and ask about conditions, and a lot of times fair conversations happen there. There is not any outreach at this point in time, and that's something we could work towards.
I just didn't see anything, so thank you.
Let me ask you, as pertains to the remodeling of the office complex or the office building, where are we at there?
We're in phase 3 at the moment. That includes the south wing is complete. The lobby and the offices off the lobby are about 80%.
So we're almost
70%
done.
complete right now. We're doing those offices off the north side of the lobby and the 2 executive offices before we actually do the lobby, so that obvious reasons, going over the tile floor and everything. And then installing doors on the wings, and then phase 4, the north wing, would be further out.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so, would you turn to the next one, Dave? So we've completed the infrastructure departments and agencies, and so we now have remaining Culture and Rec, which is the library and the Park and Recreation District. So I didn't know if you guys wanted
Let's
to
take a quick 5-minute break and we'll come back.
All right, Penny said there are no cookies, though, so.
Bill.
now going to consider the library. We'll now be considering the library, so everybody needs to be very quiet.
That's old-fashioned.
That was good. Good. That was good, Ed.
All right, Dave Rodney with Budget and Financial Planning. With me at the table here is Nancy Hupp, the Chair of the Johnson County Library Board, and Sean Casserly, the County Librarian. I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to begin. She's got some prepared remarks she'd like to make.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon. And as Chair of the Johnson County Library Board of Directors, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to discuss the 2019 library budget. Johnson County Library's mission is to provide access to ideas, information, experiences, and materials that support and enrich people's lives. We are pleased to report that we have followed through on last year's proposed plan of spending. The Library Board wishes to thank you for your support of our comprehensive library master plan. We have continued to focus on the community's strategic needs of education and community building while providing the most accessible and convenient service. We continue to provide library services at the lowest cost and the highest efficiency as compared to other libraries in the Kansas City metro area. This careful and deliberate approach in planning and implementation continues to be successful. I'm happy to report that the Monticello Library will be opening this year on August 5th at 1 p.m. on time and on budget, and I hope it's on your calendars. I want to take this moment to recognize the outstanding work of both the county facilities and finance departments. Their support, advice, and expertise have been absolutely invaluable in this process. Construction is underway at the Lenexa City Center, and the 2019 opening is on schedule. They have laid the foundation and are in the process of erecting the steel infrastructure. If you haven't been by there lately, I do hope you get a chance. It's exciting to see how it explodes up out of the ground. The Library Board is extremely proud of this city-county partnership, and we want to thank the City of Lenexa in helping us to create a library that will enrich the entire community. In 2017, the Library Board adopted a new policy, Administrative Regulations 107010, which established the Library Budget Review Committee. The committee comprises 3 Library Board members and meets 4 times annually to review the library's budget and any changes to the board proposed by the county librarian. The committee then reports back to the Library Board at our monthly meetings. The information of this committee assures the correct level of oversight and that library funds are being expended in a manner that will meet the strategic goals of our organization. The library's revenue projections continue to show growth as the projected property valuation rises. Our projected increased expenditures are in the area of collection development, personnel, commodities, programming, IT infrastructure, existing facility maintenance, and contractual services. The Library Board is happy to report that we maintain a healthy reserve that will allow for unexpected but needed expenditures. The Library Board asked library staff to review all personnel requests and to provide justification for each position. We currently have library specialists providing services to children birth to 6 years old through early literacy initiatives, and Teen Services provides programming for children ages 13 to 19. The school-age coordinator fills the age gap, providing library services for children in the age range of 7 to 12. The Library Board continues to support the process of conservative yet careful management of expenditures, and we request your approval of the 2019 budget. I'd like to thank all of you for your service and your commitment to our communities and your support staff. We all know where the work gets done.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nancy, for that, and thanks to the library board. Last year, in fact, the last 2 or 3 years, your work has been very, very busy and very, very involved. So thanks to all the staff as well as the library board for their good work. Okay.
Now I'll turn it over to Sean. He's going to talk about the library's mission, vision, what success looks like.
We always come back as we're doing a 5-year strategic plan and focus on the vision of and the mission of the library. And so Johnson County Library provides access to ideas, information, and experiences and materials that support and enrich people's lives. That's what we do every day. But the vision is that Johnson County creates an environment for people to learn, to explore, to enjoy, and to create connections, which is right around the idea of community building, which is one of the pillars of our strategic plan. So some of the key points that I think are really important. We provide the community educational opportunities in a safe and inviting environment. Those particularly educational opportunities are around topics that maybe have diverse points of view, and the library acts as a neutral platform where people can discuss topics that are probably more difficult but are important for the community to think about. The importance of providing community neighborhood building experiences. Again, this is about neighbors meeting neighbors, and I think, again, along with the parks, we offer kind of opportunities in our programming. And I think May 25th we have a partnership where we're showing a movie, The Wizard of Oz. It's a chance for people to come together, for the kids to experience, and for people to sit around and watch a movie outside. Creating a patron-centric library built on convenience and enhancing access to resources is all about removing barriers, particularly when we think about it as a business experience. Some people want to come in and linger in the library. Some people just want to come and get what they need and move on. And for those people, we try to remove all the barriers. And we want to create focus on interactive programming rather than passive programming. It's far more enriching for people to be able to ask questions, to interact with our speakers and our authors, to interact with each other. And that's really where adult learning is. All the studies show us that people really value that, and we see that with the numbers. I'll hand it over to David.
Thank you, Sean. As you can see here, library expenditure budgets, and this represents the library operating and special use combined, is roughly $38.2 million, up from $36.1 million from 2018. A lot of what the library has is in way of local tax support. That portion for 2019 is roughly $36.5 million. Budgeted FTEs are going up. We're going from 303.68 to 327.79. As you can see on the next page here, we're adding additional staff for the Lenexa City Center Library, which is roughly doubling in size, and that FTE is about 19.9 and scheduled to open in 2019. And then the school age coordinator librarian is filling a gap that we see we have probably in the school age, elementary school age patrons. We have early literature and teen, and this would be bridging that gap. And then we have the library capital replacement plan is about $1.1 million that goes into our existing library facilities, equipment, and furnishings. And our plan to acquire a materials handling sorter. You may recall last year there was one that we did for Corinth. This one would be for the Antioch branch. And then the $2 million that's listed at the bottom is the cash component for our future debt-funded capital projects. With that, just quickly go to trends and measures. Some of what we have outlined here were user visits, our annual circulation, the number of people served by our early lit programs, and our library webpage visits. So those are just kind of a few of many of the library trends and measures that we look at. So with that, I'll turn it back to the board for questions you may have of any of us here at the table.
Okay. How is your legacy plan, your capital plan? Where are you at in the in that program? On target, on track?
We're on track. the board took a look at the prioritization. Previously, we've been working with the City of Overland Park, and that looked at that, but then an opportunity has come up recently with the City of Merriam, and we've recently reprioritized. The board will be hearing in June the presentation on the various options and be presented with an opportunity to make a decision on setting a direction going forward. So as far as I'm concerned, we are on track. We have accelerated the schedule. Originally, it was a 20-year plan, but I think on the last calculation, we should have all of the .75 mil expended within 11 years and have all 5 projects underway. So that would be Lenexa, Monticello, Antioch, Corinth, and Blue Valley.
Okay. And the was reading, I think, in the Shawnee Mission Post the other day about the new Antioch branch, City of Merriam. Is that one progressing?
That one is progressing very well. We have a core library team working with the city and talking about what the needs of the community center and what the needs of the library are. And I would have to say that the city has been a wonderful partner working with us, and we realized that for both of us, the key point was adjacency, that the ability to enter into the community center and then exit the community center and walk to the library. The other key piece for both of us was the ability to provide parking. And so I have nothing but positive things to say about the City of Merriam. They've been great partners through this process, and we're making good progress, and I'm going to be happy to report that on the 14th.
Okay, well, thank you. This is a minor item, but as I was doing some research in regards to Martin Luther King Day and some of the early African American participation in Johnson County going back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, I ran across something which I don't know whether it's correct or not, but there was a mention of one of the first libraries in Johnson County was in one of those African American schools or facilities. I don't know whether any of that history is displayed in any of our library, but the Merriam Library might be a good opportunity to display some of that history.
Yep, I think I agree. I had seen that recently also, and I can't remember where. What I'm happy to say is that we partnered this year with JCCC and kind of celebrated the anniversary of Martin Luther King, and I think we were at that event together, and I think that's something that's part of our history that we should be really proud of. Yep, and Nancy's reminding me, we've also worked with creating a downloadable app, working with Inclusion, and had Mayor Sly James and some authors, but it's a walking map talking about the history of segregation in order to bring these two communities together.
Well, anyway, that very early history, I think, is not well known. It would be nice to display it somewhere.
I agree.
Yeah. Any other questions, Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few things, Mr. Cassery. I appreciate your continued efforts to think strategically and update that. That's very good, and I want to encourage you to do that. I was looking at some of the measures that were presented here, and some of them were quite fascinating, if I'm interpreting them correctly. For example, library web page visits for 16 and 17 and 18 were originally estimated to be a little bit over 3 million, but actually it's was 5.6 million, so significantly higher than what was projected, which I'm guessing is a good thing, that people are using the internet more robustly. So I don't know if it's just general information or if they're using that to access the collection or not, but it looks good.
Yeah, it does look good. The spike that you're seeing on that is a reflection of the redesign of that site in 2017. And so what we did is we added on the homepage is what would be a blog. It's incorporated into the website. So there's an article, and that is almost updated daily. So there's an element of telling the public what's going on, and then for them to have a chance to interact and leave comments. I think the redesign of the site and this the rate that we refresh and the content that we put there, it attributes to that spike.
Yeah, and that's good. At least I think it's good. It seems like quite a jump. So good for you. And it talks about the ratio of copies of bestsellers to patrons had been projected to be 1 to 5, and actually was 1 to 4. Now that would be considered an improvement, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure. Some of these efficiency and cost measures I wasn't tracking with real well, but the one that I found curious was under outputs. It talks about total information contacts had been projected to be almost 190,000, but kind of dropped down to 165,000, over a 10% decrease. Does that mean there are fewer people coming into the library? Because I see that user visitors on your slide 36 are down. So is there a trend there that people are going more online to get library access and less direct contact, or is there some other interpretation I should be looking at?
It's a combination. So what you'll see is there's an increase in digital usage, which particularly in downloading of audiobooks and e-books, but it's also part of the program that we're going out into the community and doing more programs. So this year we did Elementary, and we did it at the Arts and Heritage. Movies in the Park is an attempt for us, and we get 500 or 600 people. So rather than trying to run that within the building, what we're trying to do is embed the library in other places where people frequent. So the idea is, rather than waiting for the customer to come in a passive way to your location, we're going out and finding them where they want to be. And so I think that is where you're seeing the decline. I think also the question is,
Client contacts, you mean?
Yeah, high contact.
You don't include those then as contacts?
We don't include it in door count, no.
Okay.
No. And it's also hard, we can do a regular count, but that would be more under programming, and I think we're seeing a real increase on that as we look at what we've done is create 3 general themes throughout the year, and then we provide programming to those themes. So the summertime is all about music, and then in the fall we'll be talking about women's voices and be highlighting that through our programming.
Well, changing gears slightly here, there are several staffing requests here, and Ms. Hump talked about the school-age coordinator, and I was looking at my notes, and I was trying to see how that was going to impact your measures here. I couldn't see that in what was presented, but then I was looking at last year, and one of last year's was a engagement coordinator, civic engagement, public engagement coordinator, or civic engagement coordinator. And I was just wondering, it actually looked like there's been a decrease in those programs. I was wondering what was going on there, if that program has gotten off the ground, that person's been hired, if you're seeing the impact that you had hoped for.
Yeah, I think that person was at 50%, and we've reallocated the resources so they're at 100%. Let me talk a little about the school-age coordinator, because there's a study that just came out this week. We know that nationally that about 35% of 4th and 8th graders are proficient at reading, and that's about 65% are not. The interesting thing is then to look at Kansas and go, do we match national standards? Yeah, we do. Those track pretty closely. Then you take a look at your school districts, and particularly certain school districts, what you're seeing is that 50% of the 4th grade reading class are not on a pathway to college, particularly under their English language arts. This is a real need, and when we talk to school principals, it's something that they continue to struggle with. when we go out and talk in the business community, again, it's about having skilled labor that's literate. It continues to be a problem. The other piece for us is that the number of actual programs that we run on community engagement have decreased, but the actual attendance of those events has increased. And so when we're looking for capacity, what we wanted to do is be more strategic about what we're offering. That may have a net effect of pushing those numbers down, but we do fewer programming, and that allows us to allocate resources in a more one-to-one public service. So again, the need is greater than the resources we have, but the way that we're strategically applying that, I think, is at the right balance for this community.
Okay. Well, that's good information. I was trying to understand a little bit because last year we had added 4 information specialists and a training specialist, and with those resource allocations, that wasn't enough to address the school age coordinator position and those needs?
No, it was not.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me raise an issue which we have discussed before, and that is when we get down to the closing phase of our budget considerations, I'm going to suggest that we consider a small reduction in the mill levy for the library. Both the library and the parks have dedicated mill levies, and with what's happened to appraised values of residential property this year, I think we need to be able to demonstrate that we've taken a close look at all of our levies. And I guess what we've discussed previously, and I would still be there, is the increase over the library's estimated revenues, I think, are somewhere around 250,000, and that we use about half of that and offer a small mill levy reduction, maybe 0.015, something in that category. And with the quarter mill that we're looking at for the general budget, I've made the same suggestion to parks. We could maybe have a total mill levy reduction to somewhere around 0.3 or 0.30 something. So that's a suggestion that I'll be offering when we get down to the closing considerations of the budget.
Thank you.
I don't want to impact your legacy plan, your capital improvement plan, and the staffing that we'll need for Monticello opening, but I don't think it does that at all. So I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Park and Recreation District, so we'll get those folks up there and get started.
Good afternoon. I'm here with Jill Geller, the Director of Park and Rec, and Nancy Wallerstein, the Board Chair, and I believe Nancy has some opening comments she'd like to make.
I do. Thank you for having us. We weren't unexpected, I know, but saving the best for last. The Park District is here in full force, and I want to introduce you to a couple of people you probably already know, but some tremendous board members that I'm lucky to serve with. George Schlegel, might wave, and Paul Snyder is here. So, and with those two, we bring a group of our amazing staff members. I am so honored I get to work with these people. Of course, Jill Geller is our Executive Director. If you'll raise your hand, so just in case they haven't met you yet. Jeff Stewart is our Deputy Director. Bill Mawson is our Superintendent of Parks and Golf Courses. Dan Field, Superintendent of Safety and Outdoor Education. He's also our Park Chief, Police Chief. Rhonda Pollard, Superintendent of Recreation. Newly joining us, and I think this is her 1-month anniversary, is Noelle Testa. She's our new Chief Financial Officer, and we're thrilled to have her on board. Also with us in finance is Susan Mong. She is our finance analyst. And Mindy Love, our Johnson County Museum Executive Director. So we are here to answer any questions that you might have. We had a great year in 2017. It started with the opening of the Arts and Heritage Center. And thank you so much. We are so honored to be able to operate that for the county. And then we opened up Lexington Lake Park and Coffee Creek Trail. It was even capped by our gold medal award from the National Park and Rec Association. So we're all sitting here with our little gold medals on. This award is amazing to be recognized by your peers and to come out on top nationwide. It really is fabulous. 2018 is going to be a fabulous year also. Thank you. I think just about everybody was there for the opening of Dodgetown, which was a couple of weeks ago. I have heard that we throw one great party, so I love having you out there and checking out Dodgetown, and thanks to Chairman Eilert for kicking us off.
We need the rain. We should have another ribbon cutting.
I know. Well, we are going to have another ribbon cutting, and that's going to be May 26th.
Almost rope cutting.
Yeah, we could barely get the rope cut. May 26th is our beach house at the marina and at our beach. So, that's at noon, and that's going to kick off the Memorial Day weekend. So be sure and join us then. It should be another great party. Also coming up a little bit later is Big Bull Creek. This is going to be such a wonderful facility and opportunity for our citizens. It's going to be amazing, so you need to come out for that. And then eventually Meadowbrook Park will be opening up later this summer, maybe August or September. We'll be having a ribbon cutting for there. And we just won a NACPRO award for design and for
Arts and Culture Facility?
Yeah. So
for the Arts and Heritage Center.
Yeah, so we're thrilled to be recognized nationwide over and over again. As always, the staff has put together a really detailed 2019 budget. I mean, our budget book is like 2 inches thick, and it's a terrific document, and any answers that we have or any questions that we have are answered in that document. So I know that you're going to find that our budget is right on target. We have some new developments coming up in 2019. We have Cedar Creek and Cedar Niles property that's coming up. So, yay, 6th District. And, of course, we are taking care of our already valuable assets. And these expenditures have been outlined in the budget. So you'll be sure and take a look at that. Also, the legacy plan, we're working diligently on the legacy plan, and thank you so much for your support of our legacy plan. As you know, it has only been funded at about 67%, so we still have a lot of work to do, and I encourage you to remember that when you check your budget. We also have some new park trails opening, just trails opening all around the county, and I know that you're going to hear more about those later. So thanks again for all of your support, and I'm turning it over to Jill Geller.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, you know our organization has a lot of energy, and I think you see that it starts at the top. So good afternoon, Commissioners. As Nancy mentioned, we have a lot going on at JCPRD. There's no doubt we're very busy, but as always, I want to start by extending our sincere appreciation to you for providing us the funding and the resources needed and as reflected in our 2019 budget to meet our residents' expectations. We know the community is supportive of that as well. So appreciation of our efforts is evident by the visitors to our new parks and facilities that have opened and the attendance at our groundbreakings and our ribbon cuttings. Many of you know even on a semi-rainy day, there were several hundred people at Dodgetown a few weeks ago, and another 1,000 have watched it on Facebook. Upcoming ribbon cuttings at the Shawnee Mission Park Beach, Big Bull Creek Park, Meadowbrook Park, and our 2 inclusive playgrounds, all scheduled for this year, are sure to be well attended as well. So our county park and rec system is very highly valued. The county citizen survey supports this, and the fact that we have more than 10 million park visitations and rec program participations every year supports this as well. So our 2019 budget allows us to continue this important work. Opening and managing new parks and trails, taking care of our valued existing assets, and providing recreational opportunities that keep our residents healthy and build a sense of community. JCPRD's parks, trails, and services are a leading quality of life component that promotes the growth and the economic development for the county, attracting businesses and residents to our community. So again, thank you for affording us the resources to provide a park system that's recognized as the best in the nation. Moving on to our slides, you'll see this first slide shows our mission, which is to enhance the quality of life in Johnson County by providing high-quality parks, services, and recreation programs. We often ask ourselves, what does success look like? And how do we know if we're successful? Well, we know that JCPRD is viewed as an industry leader, locally, regionally, and nationally. It's all about serving people. So the fact that we have more than 10 million visitations to our parks and facilities speaks volumes. We receive high marks on the citizen survey, and I don't need to go into that because you've reviewed that. We are nationally accredited, I think you're well aware, and one of the very few park agencies in the nation that met 100% of the accreditation standards. We were awarded the gold medal, and our new parks and facilities have been so well received. Just at the Arts and Heritage Center in Lexington Lake Park, for part of a year last year, we had over 145,000 visits to those facilities. Just to kind of tell you a little bit of what our legacy plan looks like as it relates to the 2019 budget. We have about $11.8 million devoted to completing our legacy plan. About 65% of that comes from the .75 mil that you all provided, and the remaining 35% comes from existing district funds. $1.5 million of that will be devoted to new park and trail development in 2019. We do have debt service payments on many of our new developments, including Big Bull Creek, Meadowbrook Park, and Cedar Niles, which is upcoming. We have a small amount of money dedicated to master plans and studies that we'll be planning for 2019. Our existing park and facility improvements are the majority of our capital improvements in our legacy plan in 2019 at over $6 million, and then a small amount for vehicle and equipment replacement as well. Key points as they relate to our general fund, our employee benefits fund, and our bond and interest fund. We are maintaining a flat mill levy at 3.112 mills. We're continuing implementation of the legacy plan, beginning and continuing development at Cedar Niles. And as I mentioned, maintenance and improvement of our existing assets is our focus in 2019. I do want to say that 2019 will be the final year for the bond and interest payment. This savings in future years has already been calculated into our legacy plan development, so we've already programmed out those dollars to move over to the legacy plan once this debt is paid off.
And the budget graph shows that the budget for 2019 is $39.1 million, again, all within the same 3.112 mil. The RARs go from 143 to 152. That's additional of 9, which are all requested through the request for additional resources this year. Those 9 include 4 park police officers, and then the other 5 positions are primarily driven by the legacy plan, whether it's directly in a park or support of administrative support for that. And then the CIP plan is almost 8.7 million that's been funded. For the trends and measures, the annual park visitations have went from, in 2017, 7.6 million to they're estimating almost 8 million in 2018 and then 8.3 million in 19. The increases are primarily because of the new parks that they'll be opening. And then you did see a slight reduction from 2016 to 2017, and we had a couple of parks closed for renovation, one for all year and one for partial year, so that's why their visitations went down. The index crime rate in 2017, it was up to 1.95. We're estimating in 18 for it to go down, and then in 19, again at the same rate. That was what has prompted the request for the park police. However, they've already taken some proactive steps in patrolling more, which is why they're estimating in 18 already that rate to go down. The number of legacy plan projects scheduled for the year, in 17 there was 42, in 18 they're estimating at 49, and then 19, 39. And then we'll move on to the enterprise fund.
Before we get there, real quick, I do want to make note of one thing for the commissioners. I mentioned that 2019 is the last year for our debt, and we do have $115,000 in debt service reserves that we must spend in 2019, and it must be spent on that debt, and that debt is actually the general obligation bonds for the Big Bull Creek Park that were issued back in 1998. So we had not taken that into account when we first presented this budget, so we are asking for the use of those debt service reserves. They must be spent in 19, which would then slightly adjust our mill levy. It equates to about 0.01 mil. So from the original request, 0.01 mil would be reduced from our debt service fund and added to our general fund. Okay, moving on to the enterprise fund.
Unless you would prefer to ask questions about the general fund before we go on to the enterprise fund.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. So our key points for the enterprise fund in the budget as presented, certainly our enterprise fund provides programs, classes, and special events for all ages, genders, and abilities. And we know that these are important to our community as we have more than 2.5 million participations in these each year. We do maintain a fee-supported enterprise fund, including coverage of direct costs at some new facilities that will open in 2019, or one will open in 2018, but be open in 2019, which is the Meadowbrook Park Clubhouse. And then the Shawnee Mission School District Aquatic Stadium, which is owned by the school district, but we will operate, will be opening in 19 as well. So those are some key points on our enterprise fund, as well as ensuring that we meet the required debt ratio for outstanding revenue bonds.
And then the budget for the enterprise fund in 19 is $22.8 million. The FTEs will go from 333.6 to 352, which is an increase of 18. 6 of them have been requested for this year, and then the other remaining increases are the seasonal changes that happen from year to year. I'm not going to go through each one of the positions on the request, but as you can see listed out there, there is 6 positions that are requested and self-funded through the enterprise fund.
Okay.
And then the trends and measures, the facility participations in 2018, they're estimating increasing from the 17 number of 2.7 million to a little over 2.8. This would include a full year of the Arts and Heritage Center, and then Meadowbrook Park Clubhouse online in the fall of this year. And then 2019 would include the Shawnee Mission Aquatic Center to be open in the summer of 19, which would raise the estimated participation to a little over 3 million. The golf rounds per year, which is a big function of the parks, in 17, it's pretty much staying flat around 61,000 for 17 through 19. I asked Jill what caused the increase from 16 to 17, and she reminded me that golf is weather related, and it was a good weather year that year, so more people came out and golfed. And then, as you can tell from the last graph, as we probably expected, museum paid general admissions increased from 17 to 18 significantly because of the Arts and Heritage Center, and then it's showing a gradual increase in 19 as well. With that, we'll open up for questions.
Questions? Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. couple of questions related to your performance measures. I was going to commend you on the metrics that you have offered for recreational service and break-even return on investment. And I know you do a good job, but this is a good way of presenting it, and I appreciate that. And I was looking at your general performance measures. There are some new ones here. You have a couple in terms of what you call significant progress on the legacy plan. I don't need an explanation, but I think that tracking makes sense because some of them you just can't do overnight, so that makes sense. And there are several like that. Some of these I'm not sure what they mean, and I wanted to check. One of them you talk about ER ratios per quarter. And is this ER employee relations?
It is.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure what that meant, and then I'm looking at the 0.02%, 0.20%, and I'm not sure what to make of that, so I'm not sure how meaningful it is. I mean, hopefully it's meaningful to you, but I struggled with that. But having said that, I went back through some of my notes, and one of the things that I noticed is we had a memo from you back in August of 2016 about the development campaign, and you had indicated that you had initially anticipated a 5-to-1 return on investment moving up to 10-to-1 return on investment. So are you on track for that? Because I was trying to tie that to your estimates for 17 and 18 and 19. I couldn't remember what the actual cost was. I think was it a half a position or?
No, it is one position.
Okay.
And yes, the goal was to get to $500,000 in revenue generation from that position. We are not there yet. We're over $300,000, and we still have a goal to get to that $500,000 in the next couple years.
Okay.
But in addition to the work and the dollars that are coming in through Johnson County Park and Recreation District, we have revitalized the Park and Recreation Foundation, and they have become much more active as well, and we are seeing quite a few dollars come in through that foundation. We've had more than $100,000 come in through the foundation just for our 2 universal playgrounds that we're building. So the dollars that you're seeing on those performance measures are coming directly into Johnson County Park and Recreation District, but we are seeing a lot of growth in our foundation as well.
Very good. And I was noticing, Mr. Neufeld, that Parks also had turnover ratio of classified positions relative to current number of filled positions as a performance measure. So evidently, we had this conversation earlier today with another department. Your tracking of turnover is a significant issue to use, and you're under 10%. I mean, you actually list the percentage, which is great. But you also have percent of seasonal employees working more than 1,500 hours in a calendar year, and it's always 0. So what?
We keep a very close eye on that, and those may not be performance measures that we need to submit to you all.
Okay.
But we keep a very close eye on that due to ACA requirements,
Yeah.
papers requirements. It should always be 0, but it is something that we track, and it's certainly something we can take off the measures that are presented to you.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to. What am I supposed to do with it? You're fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, again, we've had this conversation earlier, and same one with the library, or similar one with the library. I think it is important to be able to demonstrate a certain level of discipline in regards to the mill levies that we all benefit from because of the increase in appraised values. And I think roughly the numbers for the park department is revenues exceeded estimates by about $370,000, I'll say. So taking half of that, let's say $185,000, and reducing the mill levy modestly, 0.015 or something, I think collectively we can come up with a mill levy reduction a little over 0.3 mils, or right at 0.3 mils, and I think it's important to be able to demonstrate that we have taken those steps. In addition, both the library and the parks were not were held harmless last year, and there was no mill levy reduction, even though the county reduced the general fund by $0.25 mil. So I hope we can accomplish that as we come down to the final budget decision. But I wanted to, again, on the record, verify that we'd had that conversation, and that's going to be my suggestion to the board. So, Mr. Neufeld.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for those watching. I've talked to the chair about this a number of times. The chair is referring to the growth of the 0.75 mils, not the entire park or library mill levy. And he's talking about the growth that we've experienced above what was originally projected when we set those plans in place.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Again, being able to continue to move forward on the parks capital improvements program are very, very important, and I don't think this impinges, I'll put it that, or interferes with that to any great extent, if any at all. So, other questions, Mr. Allen?
I'll just say, great job. You have a lot on your plate. You've accomplished a lot. I think the park system, frankly, is in better shape than it's ever been. A lot of exciting things are happening. So, congratulations. Those things don't come about easily. I clearly understand. There's a lot of work that takes to open these parks, to build new buildings, staff them correctly, and you appear to be making a very smooth transition. So, congratulations.
You know, I'd make this suggestion when we cut the ribbon at the at Shawnee Mission Beach House. Is Mr. Mawson going to be required to wear a swimming suit at that time, or?
If that is your direction, Chairman.
Pardon?
If that is your direction.
No, please.
I was thinking Speedo.
I'd have to go back to a 1915s model if.
Chairman, can I ask one question?
Yes, Mr. Brown.
I was wondering, back on slide 42, we've got 4 park police officers that are considered funded, and how many new parks are we covering 17 to today? How many new places does the Parks Police have to cover now versus, say, in 16? I know there's more.
There's
I don't
more,
know
and
how
I'm
many.
sorry I didn't bring that information with me, but quickly I can say it's 3 parks because we now have Lexington Lake and Big Bull Creek and Meadowbrook. We have Coffee Creek Trail. We've got additional parks open this year. I have all those statistics.
Very spread out.
And, yes, very spread out. Very spread out.
I will comment that I have seen Johnson County Parks Police vehicles more in the last probably 6 months around, because they're moving from park to park, than I have probably seen collectively in my whole life. It's impressive. They're around and they're out and about, and I support the needing the more parks police, as we have encouraged the sheriff and our local police departments to crack down on issues related to drugs and trafficking. I think we have to make sure our parks stay safe in that process and they don't become a collection spot.
We appreciate that support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are done with the department and agency portion, and really the only thing left to discuss is the upcoming schedule. Robin's going to come up. As most of you know, Robin is the keeper of the revisit list, and for those who are not familiar with that, I know the board is. The revisit list includes changes to the budget with regard to RERs and CIPs, whether they're funded or recommended for funding in the proposed budget or not recommended for funding, they're listed. And what we ask the board every year is to work through that list, and if there are items on there that a board member wishes to discuss changing the status from funded to unfunded, or from unfunded to funded or partial, to go ahead and make a note of that. There's also room on the last page for other topics, so it's not limited to that. The main thing with this is that we use this as a clarifying point to make the next budget follow-up meeting, the deliberations, more productive, and to focus what the board may want to talk to. So typically what we do is ask the commissioners to all fill this out and get it to, you can hand it to support staff and they'll get it to Robin and we'll compile that. And so then first thing next week when we are scheduled to meet at 11 on Thursday is that we will just hand out that list, and then typically at that time the board decides what the threshold is of what you want to refocus. I think in some years we've done 2, and in some years we've done 3, but that's really a board decision, and we typically make that when we look at the list and then really consider the time that we have available. I do think we have some scheduling issues next week. We are starting at 11. I'm not sure that we'll have all 7 board members for the entire time, as I recall, and I'm not sure that we'll have all 7 on Friday. So I don't want to rush anybody, but I did want to let you know that from what I heard earlier this week, I don't think that we'll have all 7 of you for both meetings in their entirety.
Scott, to add to that, I understand that one commissioner may have to leave close to the very end on Thursday, so I think we'll probably be okay Thursday. Friday, there's one commissioner gone that I'm aware of.
So and luckily, I mean, if you guys have, if everything stays on track next Thursday morning and we can start on 11, that will obviously help, since we're not doing a 1 to 5, because there is one commissioner, I think, that needs to leave between 2:30 and 3, I believe. So anyway, with that, if anybody needs another copy of the revisit list, we can go downstairs and run one off and get it to you. But I would say that typically what we do when working through the revisit list is that we just work at the board's pace and the board's pleasure through those issues that come up or anything else. If we get to a decision point, the next scheduled item is a budget item on June 14th, which would be to publish the maximum expenditure budget. I would remind the board that last year when we rolled back a quarter mil, we published at a constant mill and made known that the intent was to roll back, but we did want to keep that available to us in case there was any bad news out of Topeka or anything else that would really cause us to to juggle things. So Robin reminded me that last year we did publish at a constant mill levy, but then let the public know that the intent was to roll back. That allowed us to go through the summer and have the state finalize their budget and get the final valuation numbers and allowed us to move forward. And obviously we were able to follow through on that plan. There weren't any hiccups as far as that goes. The other thing I would tell you is that Paul is mailing responses to the first round of appeals, the in-house appeals, this Friday. And so we will be talking to him about where things stand. Typically, the greatest movement in terms of the valuation is from the first notice to the first round of appeals, but then we still have to estimate what's out there. So we will be working with him. Last year, the big adjustment was a brand new school that we knew was coming, and it would be exempt as soon as the paperwork was turned in, and that happened after we adopted the budget in August, but before the tax roll was complete. So last year we rolled back past the 0.25 target, and so we still hit the 0.25 after that exemption went through. So we'll be talking about that next week, as well as a revisit list, and that's kind of where things stand for now and what's ahead of us. But again, the main thing is that we have these set up to sort of make those deliberations, but then we do need to take a little bit of a pause until we get more valuation numbers.
So May 25, that would be next Friday?
Right, and we'll have 6 commissioners present, from what I understand.
I have a KAC board meeting at Topeka that day.
5 commissioners present.
No, there will be 6. Yeah, okay.
I think the goal, or we're hoping that we can get a majority on the 24th, because again, as Scott said, at this point, we're looking for direction to set the maximum, knowing that there's a possibility that we could come back for discussions later if we needed to. If there wasn't consensus at that point, we could always set a maximum.
Okay, that's fine. We'll leave the date the way it is. I'll adjust my other schedule.
Chairman?
Yes.
May I ask, just to throw something out? In the years that I've watched this, and then last year being involved, it took a minimum number of commissioners to check a box in order for it to advance to a higher level of discussion. I would like to propose that in the event that there's 2 or more commissioners that have asked, that there could be a separate meeting to educate them on the pieces that they're asking about. It does not require this setting venue, but to make sure that the commissioners who have questions aren't left out simply because there aren't enough boxes checked. If they've got questions, I would feel more comfortable knowing. If I'm the only one asking the question, then we don't need to have a meeting about me. I can just talk to somebody and figure it out. But if there's 2 or more, I would like to side meeting for that to be a conversation point and for that to kind of be the standard that we use this time so that everyone gets the information they need.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we will look at the revisit list that's comes in by the close of business tomorrow. Is that right? And, yeah, we'll try to be flexible in that regard. Mr. Allen?
I just got a question. I'm fine for next Friday for the meeting, but is there a possibility of having that final budget wrap up the following Thursday at a regular meeting? Would that work better? Or?
Well, I would say there's a possibility that you could do it next Thursday, depending on how many questions there are.
No,
But
not
Scott,
talking
what-
about next Thursday, but the following Thursday after the
Right,
after
and I
the
guess my
25th.
point is, could you do it in one session? It's possible, but I don't know about the following Thursday as far as posting.
I'll be
Scott.
gone. I'll be gone
Oh.
that week.
Yeah, that would. Yeah. So
There was 2 or 3 people going to be gone that week.
we'll leave it
See you
as
on-
posted. All right. Okay. Well, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recalled it.